Hey everyone, this is FIDE Master Kostya Kavutskiy here for Chess.com, and today I'm going to be covering the Semi-Slav defense. The Semi-Slav defense is a very popular opening among grandmasters and other strong players because it's very solid and it leads to some really interesting positions. And it's definitely an opening that every chess player should be aware of. Here we have pretty much the main position of the Slav defense, where black played an early c6 to support his d5 pawn. And I already did a video here on YouTube pretty much covering the basics of what happens after d takes c4, which would lead to the classical Slav defense. Now black has two other main and serious options here. The first one is a6, which is known as the chameleon Slav, and I'll be covering this in a future video. And the second move, which I want to take a look at today, is e6, which lends further support to the pawn on d5, opens up the road for this bishop to get out, and can lead to some pretty incredible positions. So here, white basically has two main options. The first is bishop g5. This move is very natural because at some point, white is going to want to play e3 and get his king bishop out and castle kingside. But bishop g5 is a good move to start with because e3 would block this bishop in on c1. That said, there is some drawbacks to this move bishop g5, which is that at some point black might be able to take this c4 pawn and white wouldn't be able to win it back immediately. But here, if black can take this pawn on c4, they're already ready to just play b5 and have a clear extra pawn, which is what makes this move bishop g5 kind of risky. So for a while, a lot of players played this move d takes c4 right away. And then after e4, which is very natural, gaining space in the center and opening up the bishop, black would play b5. And this is known as the Botvinnik variation, named after the world champion Mikhail Botvinnik. But the problem with this line is that white can play e5. So they're threatening to win this pin knight. Black really only has one option here, which is to play h6, counterattacking the bishop, bishop h4, keeping the pin, and g5. And a lot of games have gone this way because all the moves have been very natural after d takes c4. You know, e4, gaining space in the center, b5, holding onto the pawn, and now white's trying to win the piece with e5. So h6, bishop h4, and g5. And this was the only way for black to avoid losing their piece. And now white found this tactic here, knight takes g5. Then after hg, bishop takes g5. White has temporarily sacrificed the piece, but they're going to take this knight in the very near future and win their piece back. And the pawn structure you're going to get is very unique. It's unlike any other opening you'll see. And that's why the Botvinnik variation is known as one of the most sharpest lines out there. And of course, if you want to know more on this opening, maybe I'll make another YouTube video covering just this variation, but I would recommend you study this line on your own because it's very complex and it requires really diligent study to understand what's going on. So recently, or I guess in the past 10-15 years, players have been moving away from this d takes c4 line because it's very risky for black, and with accurate play, white definitely gets the better chances for the initiative and to get a big advantage out of the opening. So just as often as d takes c4, black has been playing this move h6. And this is known as the Moscow variation. And the first line we should cover here is that sometimes white simply trades the bishop for this knight on f6. And at first it looks counterintuitive because you usually don't want to give up your bishops for knights so early in the game. But in this case, white definitely gets a couple of neat advantages for making this exchange so early. The first one is that, he's exchanged the only piece that black has developed. So after something like e3, white is definitely ahead in development since he's got both of his knights out, and then he's going to play bishop d3 and castles next. The second thing is that black's queen is kind of misplaced on f6. It would rather just be on d8, and the point is that after black's natural move like bishop e7 and something like knight d7, both of these pieces, the knight and the bishop, would rather be on this f6 square. The knight because it can control some squares in the center, and the bishop as well could be very useful in f6. So the problem for black here in this line is, although they have the two bishops, which have very good potential, they have to solve the problem with the flexibility of their development. And I think a common way to develop for black is to play g6, followed by bishop g7, and then maybe knight d7, possibly bringing the queen back and playing knight f6, or going for one of these breaks with perhaps taking on c4 first and then e5. And that's typically the way black tries to play this line. And so white is playing to have more space and better development, and black is just trying to complete his development and perhaps equalize the power in the center so that his two bishops can start working. And basically success in this line is determined by whether or not black can activate his light squared bishop, which for the moment is sort of blocked in. A more aggressive option other than bishop takes f6 is to play bishop h4. But this move is known as the anti-Moscow variation, is connected with a pawn sacrifice. Because now after black plays d takes c4, like in the Botvinnik variation, white responds e4, and now g5 first. And this is the whole point of playing this h6 move so early on, is that black can now play g5, and white doesn't have this tactic knight takes g5 because, they haven't played e5 yet, and this would simply just lose a piece for white. So after g5, bishop g3, now black supports the pawn with b5. And this is another incredibly interesting opening variation because white is not going to be able to win back the c4 pawn. Black's pretty much defended it for good. On the other hand, white has tons of compensation here because they have better development, they have a very nice center, and black has weakened themselves on both sides of the board. So typically, white's going to try to open up the position, maybe not right away in the opening, but definitely in the early middle game, because black is going to be underdeveloped. And if you notice, black's king doesn't really have an obvious place to be. Right? For the white king, bishop e2 and castles, and white's king will be very safe on the king side. But it's very unclear what black should be doing with their king. And if they're not careful, a lot of times white can break with a move like d5, and black's king gets caught in the crossfire. White also has some ideas of playing h4, undermining this g5 pawn, and a4, undermining the b5 pawn. So it's a very rich position full of ideas for both sides. Of course, black is trying to complete his development with moves like bishop b7, knight d7, maybe bishop g7, and try to get his king castled. Sometimes kingside, sometimes queenside. Really depends on what white is doing. And if black wants counterplay at some point, they're going to want to try to organize this break c5, which will sort of open up the bishop on the b7 and really get all of black's pieces into play. Obviously, this is a very sharp position, and if you want to learn more about it, you should definitely study it in depth on your own, because there's really a lot of interesting ideas for both sides. So this pretty much sums up part 1 of the Semi-Slav defense. In the next part, I'm going to be taking a look at the move e3, which leads to maybe calmer positions rather than after bishop g5, but positions that are quite interesting as well and have a lot of interesting ideas and plans for both sides. So stay tuned for part 2 of the Semi-Slav defense. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.